All right, listeners, buckle up, because today we're stepping into the scandal that is Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. We're talking beauty, influence, and maybe a little bit of the supernatural.
Oh,
And a handsome young man, Dorian Gray, who finds himself in the middle of a world obsessed with appearances and pleasure. It's like a Victorian cautionary tale, but with some serious bite. And don't worry, we're not going in blind. We've got excerpts from the introduction and some juicy chapters to guide us. Plus, those scholarly insights are always a treat.
you know, it's amazing how Wilde managed to shake up those rigid Victorians with this novel. I mean, imagine a society where respectability and keeping up appearances were everything. Then, bam, this story explodes onto the scene, celebrating pleasure and beauty above all else. It was bound to ruffle some feathers.
Well, it definitely sounds like it. And speaking of ruffling feathers, the intro really dives into how the critics went after The Picture of Dorian Gray. They were throwing around accusations of moral decay, saying it belonged in the hands of the Criminal Investigation Department. Some even labeled it French decadence, which, let's be honest, wasn't exactly a compliment back then. What was it that got under their skin so much?
Well, you have to remember, the Victorians were all about duty, morality, the whole shebang. Wilde just flipped those ideas on their head. His writing was like a challenge, even a kind of glamorous rebellion. And let's not forget the whole aesthetic movement bubbling up at the time. Art for art's sake was their motto, and Wilde's novel embodied that, especially with Lord Henry Wotton, who's basically the poster boy for pursuing beauty and pleasure above all else.
Yeah, and that art for art's sake idea. It's pretty clear in how Dorian lives his life throughout the book. He becomes so focused on staying beautiful that he loses any sense of, well, a moral compass. And to add insult to injury, there was that brutal review from the Scots Observer. They actually said the book was only fit for outlawed noblemen and perverted telegraph boys. Ouch.
It just goes to show how much Wilde's work really got under people's skin. The whole idea that art could be dangerous, even corrupt young minds, that was a huge deal. That review is a reminder of how powerful art can be, how it challenges the status quo and makes people question everything. It's interesting because we're still wrestling with those same debates today about art that pushes boundaries.
It's true. Those ideas from way back then still resonate. So let's dive into the story itself. Chapter 1 drops us right into Basil Hallward's studio. We're talking roses everywhere. Basil completely enamored by Dorian. And then there's Lord Henry Lord Henry with his witty remarks, like when he says, "Beauty ends where an intellectual expression begins." It makes you think, even if you don't agree with him.
Absolutely. Right from the start, we see this clash between Basil's almost worshipful view of Dorian's looks and Lord Henry's much more cynical take. It's like Basil wants to capture that fleeting beauty in his portrait, make it last forever. And then there's Lord Henry, fascinated by how temporary youth is and the allure of experience. It's a theme that runs throughout the whole story.
And right on cue, Dorian walks in, completely oblivious to that whole conversation. Talk about awkward timing.
Dorian's entrance is pivotal because that's when his transformation really begins. He's young, he's innocent, completely captivating. And Lord Henry, he sees Dorian as a blank canvas, just waiting for, let's say, his guidance.
It's almost as if Lord Henry sets out to intentionally corrupt Dorian, exposing him to all these new experiences and ideas, leading him down a path of pure hedonism. But is it really all Lord Henry, though? Is he really seducing Dorian, or is there something already there in Dorian that makes him, I don't know, receptive to those ideas, like a nature versus nurture thing, but with an Oscar Wilde twist?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is Dorian a victim or complicit in his own downfall? It's definitely something to keep in mind as we go through the story. And speaking of things to keep in mind, let's jump ahead to chapter 6. It's a bit of a curveball. Dorian, out of nowhere, gets engaged to Sybil Vane. She's this young actress who just completely sweeps him off his feet. Seems like love at first sight. Right?
But then,
Yeah.
chapter 7 hits, and whoa, talk about a U-turn. He just dumps her.
And I mean, dumps. It's brutal.
Yeah, really harsh.
Remember, he fell in love with her acting, with the illusion, and the moment she doesn't live up to that idealized image, he just discards her. Cold.
It's like we're seeing a side of him we haven't before. And it makes me think about something the intro mentioned, that Oscar Wilde himself felt there was a terrible moral to his own story, like a warning about the dangers of living only for pleasure. Do you think this is where that moral starts to rear its ugly head?
It's definitely a turning point. When you look at the bigger picture, how he treats Sybil shows how his obsession with beauty and, well, just indulging himself, has really warped his sense of empathy. He's so fixated on his own desires that he's totally blind to how his actions affect others.
Losing his humanity.
Yeah, in a way, and it all ties back into this bigger theme that Wilde's exploring, how fleeting beauty actually is. Dorian's terrified of his looks fading, of time passing, that he just clings to these fleeting moments of pleasure, no matter the cost.
Which brings us to a major turning point in the story.
Oh.
Chapter 9. This is where things get a little, shall we say, supernatural. Dorian notices something's off about his portrait.
Right. It's like the painting becomes a mirror reflecting his soul, all the darkness inside him, all his cruelty, his selfishness. They're leaving a mark, but not on him.
Yeah, it's like this twisted version of a portrait. The painting ages, but Dorian doesn't.
Exactly. The portrait becomes this visual representation of the consequences he should be facing. But it's hidden away, a dirty little secret, while he remains young and beautiful on the outside.
He even hides the painting in this old schoolroom, a place you associate with, like, innocence and learning, and now it's harboring this awful secret. It's almost like it's a physical manifestation of him trying to repress his guilt, bury the truth of what he's become.
And to distract himself from that guilt, from actually facing what he's done, what does he do? He dives headfirst into a life of pure hedonism.
Oh, yeah, and then there's that mysterious yellow book Lord Henry gave him, the intro links to the decadent movement. I think they even mentioned J.K. Heisman specifically. It's like that book is his roadmap to a life of excess.
It really symbolizes his break from any traditional morality. He's trying to escape the consequences of his actions by fully embracing this world of aesthetic extremes.
But he can't outrun himself forever. In Chapter 15, Dorian runs into an actress who remembers him from years ago, back when he was Prince Charming.
Right.
She's aged, but he hasn't. It's this stark reminder that time marches on, even if he can't see it in the mirror.
That scene is powerful. This stark contrast between Dorian's unchanging appearance and the reality that everyone else is subject to time. It really drives home the point that no one escapes consequences, no matter how much they try to hide.
But consequences can sneak up on you, can't they? And it's not like the people around him are getting any younger either.
Exactly. And in Chapter 19, we get this glimmer of hope, like he might actually change, try to make amends for, well, everything. But it's like trying to outrun a shadow it just doesn't work.
It's so fleeting, that moment.
Yeah.
And of course, Lord Henry's right there to shut it all down, reinforcing that idea that pleasure, it's all that matters, right? Like morality is just, I don't know, a suggestion.
Right, like a joke. It makes you wonder, though, does he even believe what he's saying? Or is this like a dangerous game he's playing?
It's a total mind game, isn't it? But regardless of whether Lord Henry's genuine or not, there's no denying he has a hold on Dorian. It's like he embodies that constant pull towards just indulging yourself, living life on your own terms, consequences be damned.
Absolutely. And all those moments of influence, they pale in comparison to where we end up. Because we're talking murder now.
Yeah, things get real dark. These excerpts we've got, they don't actually include the very end of the book, but they take us to this incredibly intense moment. Dorian confronts Basil about the portrait, that reflection of everything he's tried to hide. And, well, it gets ugly.
It doesn't go well. No,
Yeah.
Basil ends up dead, and then Dorian calls on Alan Campbell for help. And not just any help, a very specific, very disturbing kind of help.
Because Alan, he's a chemist, someone Dorian has known for years. And the way he manipulates him, using their past against him, it's chilling. He really shows just how far he's fallen. He'd destroy anyone to protect his secret.
It's like there's nothing left of the Dorian we met in the beginning.
And from there, he just keeps digging that hole deeper. He burns Basil's belongings, comes up with this whole fake alibi. It's a really stark reminder of the lengths he'll go to maintain that youthful facade everyone sees, even as everything inside him just gets darker.
It really makes you think, was it his beauty, his youth, that was the real problem? Or was it something else, that need to escape the consequences of his actions that ultimately destroyed him?
It's a question we can all ask ourselves. As we navigate this crazy thing called life, who are we letting influence us? Are the things we find beautiful, alluring even, leading us towards something good? Or are they leading us somewhere else entirely? Something to think about, isn't it? It's definitely given me chills to think about, and I hope you listeners have enjoyed this deep dive with us into Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray. It's a story that stays with you, that makes you question everything, and sometimes that's exactly what we need.